Hello, good afternoon everyone. This is Stephen Barnett from Euclid Network. We're here in London and we're very glad that you've joined us for this webinar. The winter sunshine is streaming into the Euclid office here, and we're going to shed a light today on social finance. And we have some special guests joining us from Brussels. Dana Verbal from the European Commission, and Eva Varga is joining us from Budapest, and she's one of the two co-authors of the recipe book. So this, why is this of interest for Euclid Network? Well, we're a network of social enterprises and NGOs. We want to do good in the world, and to do good in the world one way or another, you need a bit of money. So that's what we're looking at this for. So we're really on the demand side of social finance. And I've always heard that the demand for social finance is less than its supply. So we're also trying to nudge up the demand side and help our members to help each other to be more ready to take on innovative sorts of financing. So we are in this GoToWebinar platform, and there are some nice ways that you can participate as the audience. So we have a poll, which I believe we will need to launch. This is the first time we're using it, so what exactly happens after we launch the poll, we are not entirely sure. But we're going to launch a poll, and that will allow you to tell us who is here, because in the recipe book there are lots of different stakeholders, and we happen to believe that in social finance and social impact, all sorts of stakeholders have a responsibility. Everyone's responsible, so you're starting to fill in that poll, which is nice. There is also a poll, possibly a little bit later, on your awareness level of EU policy and funding for social finance, which is also going to be of interest to us. And a little bit further up the control panel, you can see the questions bar, and on the questions bar you can type in your questions, and with my colleague Vera Borsboom here, we will field those questions to the panelists. Okay, let's go on to the, I think I've done my next slide already. So yes, this is the agenda. This is also for Euclid Network, a kind of trailer for the Euclid Summit in 2018, and I will talk to you a little bit about that at the end. On the 11th and 12th of April, we will be in The Hague in the Netherlands, which is growing its profile as an impact city, and we will be holding the Euclid Summit there, which is titled Everyone's Responsible, and we will be exploring this social finance recipe book a lot more there, and also exploring the European Commission's forthcoming tool with the OECD, which is an ecosystem assessment tool. So I'm going to hand over now to Dana Verbal, who's the Policy Officer for Social Entrepreneurship in the European Commission's Department for Employment, Social Affairs and Inclusion, I think.
Yes.
Dana, hello. You're going to talk us through a few slides here. And we are now on your first slide about the social policy objectives. So it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Stephen, for the introduction. I am in my office in Brussels, where the weather was very foggy, and now it has cleared up, but of course no sunshine. But I hope this is in no way representative of the social finance markets. Just the way the weather is always in Brussels. So the reason I'm today speaking on this panel is just to give you a quick introduction to frame this recipe book for social finance in the political context, and just to tell you the story of how we came about at the European Commission with the idea of having a practical guide on how to design and how to implement activities to develop the social finance instruments, and ultimately a guide on how to build a market, because this is our aim. And on this first slide, you can see at the bottom part the current EU social policy objectives. And the idea is that social enterprises as such are not mentioned explicitly as a policy objective, but the Commission acknowledges the fact that they are a tool for achieving these objectives. And it's because of their social dimension that they contribute, for example, to better social cohesion and to fighting poverty and discrimination. Then they also have this governance dimension whereby stakeholders and parties who have an interest are involved in the decision-making process, and this contributes to creating inclusive jobs. They are very much aware of the environment, making them sustainable. And of course, they have an entrepreneurial dimension, contributing to a more entrepreneurial economy. And it is for all these reasons that social enterprises are present on the EU agenda. And actually, they have been present on the EU agenda for longer. And you will see on the next slide how this agenda has evolved. I will not go back in time further than 2011. This is the time when the Social Business Initiative was adopted. This is a communication of the Commission which acknowledged the contribution of social enterprises to the single market, and addressed for the first time very specifically the different barriers that social enterprises face nowadays. And these are linked to their lack of access to finance, or just poor access to finance, the need to improve their visibility, and the need for an enabling regulatory environment. And with this initiative, we have adopted a series of actions that we started implementing immediately after the initiative was launched. And currently in the Commission, we are still working on the basis of these actions that were launched soon after the Social Business Initiative. Still, last year in 2016, the Commission renewed its commitment and actions in support of social enterprises via another initiative, the Startup and Scale Up initiative. And then it also sent an important, I think, political commitment by mobilizing resources from the European Fund for Strategic Investments in order to build the social finance market. So at the end of last year, a series of equity products were launched with resources from the FC, or the Juncker plan. And Stephen, if you can go to the next slide. There you will see one of the actions on the basis on which we are working currently, and which also stems from the Social Business Initiative. This is the Program for Employment and Social Innovation, and in particular the third axis of the program. As you can see, a part of this third axis is allocated to social entrepreneurship in this programming period, so from 2014 to 2020. And there is a budget allocated for this. The budget was actually increased recently, but concretely how this money works, they take the shape of financial instruments, for example, guarantees or equity investments to build the capacity of intermediaries. And these instruments are implemented via intermediaries. However, there is one thing that we knew already from the ex-ante evaluation of the program, which is that the social finance market in Europe is underdeveloped, or in any case, at different stages of development, depending on the country. And this means that to be able to even have a pipeline of intermediaries that would be ready to implement the financial products that we launch under the program, we also have to invest in building the market. And we can do this by helping, for example, intermediaries to develop financial instruments, to set them up, or to develop programs that are designed to make social enterprises become ready to receive the investments on the market. And how we did this, you can see on the next and final slide I have, is we launched in 2013 a pilot action, and 21 projects received small grants, on average about 100,000 euros, to work on initiatives that would develop the market. And they either worked on the supply side, meaning the supply of finance, so setting up financial instruments, or even getting the commitment of investors, and on the demand side, meaning the social enterprises themselves and their capacity to absorb the finance on the market. And this is how we came to the idea of having a practical guide, which would draw on the experience of these projects, but also on other initiatives on the market. And the idea was to make the learnings available to any intermediary or any practitioner who wants to undertake such initiatives, because we will not be able to give finance to all the intermediaries who have a project. So this is how the recipe book happened. So it is a commission publication, but it has been authored because, of course, at the commission we are not experts in this area. We asked for external expertise, and Eva Varga and Malcolm Hay, they authored the recipe book. And more recently, in 2016, drawing on the learnings and on the success of the previous pilot action, we launched another call for proposals. And currently, we have 20 projects under implementation. Again, they work on the demand and supply side, but we also have a couple of projects, one of them developing hybrid forms of financing, and another one which has created a network of support organizations on the demand side. And we also thought that it would be good to take the opportunity, once the projects are over, to update the recipe book, because there are some things in there that can be improved. There are new developments on the market, but more importantly, I think what we want to do, and Eva can tell you more about this, is to give a better representation of the demand side of the market, because now the guide is very much focused on the supply side and on how to set up financial instruments. But we do have a lot of projects and a lot of learnings also on how to set up investment readiness programs. So this is it from my side, Stephen.
Many thanks, Dana. That's really good background to see, and you can kind of see how the EU policy and funding initiatives have developed over the last 5 or 6 years or so, from quite a low base to a level now of really stimulating the market and giving us all confidence in the ideas of social finance and social entrepreneurship. Okay, we've been joined by a few more participants since we started. I just wanted to share the results of the first poll with you. So we're now, you should be possibly seeing something, that says that 18% of the participants in the webinar are from social enterprises, nobody from the public sector, 27% academics, 9% from financiers and social investment, and 45 from support organisations, which is what we would kind of expect from the kind of people who follow the Euclid network. So we might need to do some outreach to the public sector. I take note of that one. Okay, Eva, are you there? We are now going to unmute Eva and welcome you to the webinar. Eva, can you hear us? We are trying to get hold of Eva, but she doesn't seem to be able to speak at the moment.
Hello everyone, can you hear me?
Hello Eva, you're there, good, welcome. So
yes.
we're now following on with your first slide with your and Malcolm's recipe book for social finance. So over to you.
Excellent, thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Dana, for the great intro to put the recipe book and its birth in context. My name is Eva Varga, and I'm one of the authors of this book, which was written in 2015 and published in early 2016. I just wanted to say that because in case you've been reading this book for the first time recently, you might be wondering why it's missing out on some of the most recent developments. Well, that's why. And so we'll be updating the book in the first half of next year in order to reflect the incredible innovative initiatives and some of the new developments that have taken place in the sector and in the marketplace. This is a very exciting and dynamic environment right now, and there are a lot of actors trying out and piloting a lot of really different things, which we will try to bring into the new version of this guide. A couple of words about myself and Malcolm. Malcolm Hayday, you might know, has been a social finance expert and practitioner for a really long time. He was one of the founders and the CEO of Charity Bank in the UK, the first bank that provided loan finance to charities in the form of a bank, i.e. having a license from the Financial Supervisory Authority of the UK. So that was a very innovative new way of thinking about what are sustainable ways of providing social finance. I myself have a social enterprise development background. So looking at the demand side initially, I had worked for Nest, developing a portfolio of social enterprises in Central Europe and Latin America. And as we were doing that, we actually realized that we needed to work on the supply side as well. So I did actually get involved quite a bit in setting up various funds and testing financial instruments in markets where this was really quite a novelty, as you can imagine, in Central Europe. Can we see the next slide, please? So this guide, I don't know how many of you have actually read it or read parts of it, but the book has a very kind of long title, A Recipe Book for Social Finance, a practical guide on designing and implementing initiatives to develop social finance instruments and markets. Well, that's a long way of saying that we intended to write a practical guide for practitioners with a focus on social investors. Where did this come from? Well, Dana explained some of this already, but I think the initial intention was to encourage the supply side and to entice some of the would-be or potentially interested investors to think about investing in social impact projects and enterprises, and maybe give them a how-to book, a how-to guide with examples of successful projects, with examples of successful initiatives all over the world, and to basically help them in figuring out their investment strategy, what sort of decision-making process they would need to go through, and to understand the context and the mechanics of how they might be able to make impactful investments. This is not a literature review, because we thought that there was a lot of good other literature out there, which, if you want, you can read in detail. We've got quite a good list at the end of the publication that will guide you to that. And it's not a policy paper. This doesn't mean to say we don't want the public sector and the policymakers to read it. Yes, we do, so that they would be aware of what are some of the considerations and maybe challenges or worries of other stakeholders in the marketplace. But this is really intended for practitioners mostly. Financiers, social finance intermediaries, some of you might belong to that category. Market builders, if you feel that there isn't really a developed ecosystem yet. Social enterprise support organizations, social enterprises themselves, and other interested individuals. We do define social finance. I don't know if you can look at this right now, but on page 11, just to make sure whoever reads this guide is on the same page. We're all talking about the same thing. And I think this is one of the first key steps in helping people understand where we're coming from and what it is that we mean. I think the interesting point is that we understand social finance as not merely the financing of enterprises with a social purpose, but that it is sustainable finance provided by society for society. So it's important that the social impact goal is always in the focus. We also think that this could be an interesting and useful guidebook for organizations working on the demand side, partly because nowadays we're seeing how much the demand and supply side actually are interlinked, and how much some of what's happening, let's say with investment readiness, influences the success of actual investment deals. And we also want the two sides to understand one another. So we think that if intermediaries or support organizations read this book, they'll get a better understanding of what might be some of the considerations and questions that arise on the other side. And therefore, we hope that this book is going to facilitate the dialogue. Slide 3, please. This is a quick picture that might help you understand what is the logic of this guide, and this is in the book as well on page 10. This guide is basically composed of 7 sections, and they take you through a process from scratch to having made an investment in social enterprises. The first chapter offers an initial assessment of the market. So it focuses on the very basic idea that, be it an investor, a potential investor, or an intermediary organization, you need to be aware of what's your context and what is the social enterprise field and social finance market doing around you. So basically, this is your market research. This is your opportunity to understand the landscape and also understand where you fit into that. The second chapter, which we call Create a Vision, Define Your Goals and Value Added, explains just that, i.e., once you know your context, what could be your value added and what could be your role in that context. This basically, I think, requires long-term thinking, but at the same time should be informed by the findings of the market research that we suggest you do in chapter 1. Then in chapters 3 and 4, we kind of split and we ask you whether you consider yourself to be an investor or rather an intermediary or a support organization. And if you're an investor with money in your hands, ready to invest, then please look at chapter 3 and read our tips and suggestions how to build your investment strategy. This is composed of very many different things, which I'm not going to go into detail about because it's all written in there. But just to give you a couple of examples, we mentioned things like how do you pick your geography, how do you think about what types of organizations you want to support, what local or international ones, what field of activity, what social impact you're after, what legal forms. These are all elements that will inform your investment strategy. If you are an intermediary, however, we are asking you to think about what might be your intervention strategy, i.e., what is your way of supporting social enterprises to access social finance? Is it going to be through capacity building? Are you going to be helping them to access markets? Are you going to be looking at more sort of technical bits, training on social impact? Are you going to be trying to connect them to public sector markets, or will you be looking at the relationship between financiers and social enterprises? So in other words, are you going to be a deal facilitator? Once this is clear and you've thought about it and have built the basic elements of your investment or intervention strategy, we suggest you pilot your initiative, no matter how experienced you are, and especially if you're not very experienced. So chapter 5 is devoted to what do you need to think about in order to run a successful pilot, and then how is that pilot going to inform your original strategy, or perhaps even how is that going to take you back to revisiting your initial goals and vision. That's why you can see on this graph a lot of arrows, and some of them going both ways actually, because different steps in this logical process will inform earlier steps and lead you to others. Chapter 6, you can learn about basics of how to manage your impact, how to measure and manage your impact and evaluate your pilot before you roll it out. And chapter 7, we've basically written a summary establishing learnings and ways forward for the markets. These are just some initial thoughts, which obviously everyone will need to do for their own environment and can add a lot of very interesting conclusions. Slide 4, please. This might look scary and complicated at the beginning, but this is the basic ecosystem structure that we had in mind when we were working on this guide, looking at a number of actors. And what's really important, I think, here is that there needs to be a lot of different stakeholders and actors for this environment and ecosystem to work in any country, in any region. It's not enough to just have money, or it's not enough to just have government, or just to have social enterprises with great ideas and great business models. You need them all, and you need them all to find their way to each other and to cooperate. And basically what you've got here is, on the left-hand side, you've got various types of investors, private sector and public sector, grant makers, donors, lenders, equity investors. In the middle, the very important intermediaries that we'll talk about in a minute, who connects all these investors to social enterprises and third sector organizations or non-profit organizations, call it as you may. But also, we mustn't forget that for all of this to work, you need certain market infrastructure, which in some countries exists already, in others, some of the intermediaries have to actually work on developing that market infrastructure. And that contains the public procurement system, for example, to obtain government contracts. It might also contain a system of grants and donations. It might contain a number of support structures, organizations, as well as legal structures, various legal provisions. So in other words, an enabling environment. It's very important that you understand what the ecosystem is composed of in your country or region, and also, again, what is the state of your ecosystem? What is missing? What are some of the very helpful existing elements? And where you place yourself in this ecosystem. Slide 5 will talk specifically about the intermediaries. Can we have slide 5, please? The next one? Yes. So I think in this figure, we try to emphasize that social enterprises are the focus, so they're in the middle, and intermediaries are there to facilitate their development and growth. But we understand intermediaries as a kind of broader term, not just the ones that intermediate between financiers and social enterprises to make social finance deals happen, even though that is the focus of this guide. But intermediaries are necessary and are very helpful in dealing with a whole lot of things. So facilitating the links between social enterprises and their beneficiaries, we call those monitoring intermediaries. So this would be people or organizations that help you measure and articulate your social impact. The intermediaries that work with customers, i.e. the marketing and distribution ones. Intermediaries that help you or help your dialogue with the policymakers and the government. Intermediaries that have the expertise to develop your capacity if you're a social enterprise, and also to do research and publish results and take the field forward. These would be typically what in other parts of the book we call non-financial investors. So these would be organizations. An example perhaps is Nest, or at least in the initial phases, whereby the biggest added value was the capacity building and the technical assistance that was provided to a portfolio of social enterprises. And of course, there's the financing intermediaries that will help social enterprises get access to financial resources. And social finance, in this case, I think, has been a very dynamically development area with a lot of different intermediaries appearing on the horizon. On the last slide that I had for today, I wanted, last two actually, because it didn't fit on one. We have a copy of our table 5 from the book. That is in chapter 4 on page 54, where we wanted to give you a little bit of an inventory of what kind of intermediaries and non-financial support organizations we are talking about or talking to, and what are some of the things that you might consider when you're thinking whether you want to become one. Maybe you're already one, so you can decide where you fit in. These categories, of course, are not carved in stone, but they were helpful for us to think about the types of intermediaries depending on what they focus on in terms of the social enterprises. So are they a general support organization that help nonprofits and social enterprises think about their business strategies? Are they incubators, which helps specifically startup and early stage social enterprises to get off the ground? Are they accelerators that are focusing mostly on existing social enterprises that want to scale and grow? Or are they other types of intermediaries, which I showed on the previous slide on that map? I'm not going to go through all these features and the what does it take to become one column, because we thought these would all be questions that, and bullet points that everybody would have to kind of think about and ask themselves. But this is one of the tables, for example, that I think we will be looking at again, revisiting when updating the recipe book, thinking about how we can add a new layer and how we can bring in the new types of intermediaries that have appeared since early 2016. Now, if we jump to my last slide, which says update being prepared with additional information about the role of investment readiness programs. Yes, as Dana said, we focused on social finance providers in this first guide and used a lot of the examples from the first pilot projects that the European Commission funded starting 2013. In the update, we will be adding more examples and lessons learned from the currently running projects, which started their work in 2016 and will be finishing next year. Some of them on the supply side, so providing or experimenting with the provision of innovative or hybrid finance. Others, a lot of them, working on the investment readiness, i.e. on the demand side, so working with social enterprises to make them investable. And we will be devoting more attention to that, looking at whether investment readiness means the whole long process and programs. So if somebody wants to get involved there, do they need to plan for 15 years? Or are we thinking about investment readiness as a deal by deal, based on a deal by deal basis? And what are the implications of that kind of question? We will also be bringing in new examples, new developments, potentially interesting new funds, maybe talking about or updating our thinking on crowd finance and community finance, and maybe try to look into the crystal ball to see what the future might bring. I could talk forever about this book, especially now that we've started thinking about, updating it. But I think I'll stop here so that we have enough time for questions. But I just wanted to just start it off with one question to all of you, which is, it would be really helpful if any of you had any ideas, having read the guide, what might be some gaps that you'd like to be filled? What are some of the things that you thought would be missing? I'm not promising that we'll insert those things, but we can give it a go. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. It's a very rich recipe book, and what I really like about it is that you've clearly recognised all the different players in the market. The whole ecosystem is in there, and it really communicates clearly that message that everyone's responsible for this, for social impact. What I also like is that in one of your diagrams you've got social enterprise in the middle. Coming from a network of social enterprises, I'm pretty pleased with that, because I think sometimes we might feel that in social finance the social investors are in the middle because they've got the money. So in some senses they've got the power, but I suppose the social enterprises have got the impact potential, and that's what we need to keep in mind. So Eva asked you all a question, but really it's time for we can perhaps do that by follow-up afterwards. It's time for your questions. you've been listening, maybe you've been doodling in the background or looking at your emails or preparing a PowerPoint or signing some document or other just before Christmas. But really, this is your chance. So to wake up to the content of the webinar and ask a few questions. There will be a recording of this webinar, which will be available to watch and listen to afterwards. But really, we need some questions to take it forward. While you're thinking, we're going to launch this poll, which is about your awareness levels of the EU initiatives on social enterprise and finance. So there it is. But now we're waiting for your, oh, and you're answering the poll. How exciting. So I'm not going to make the mistake that I saw somebody make at one conference, which was that there was a big poll of 200 people, and the chair drew the conclusion that 100% of people had one particular view after only one person had voted. So I'm just waiting for enough people to vote. So now 65% have actually voted, and most of you are saying that you're aware or a little aware of the EU initiatives. And in just a moment, I'll close that and share the results with you. Okay, there is a question here. Thank you, Maria Chikai from Hungary. We know you already. Hello, Maria. Your question is about how to train angel investors. So I suppose, let me turn this into a more specific question, Eva. If you have an angel investor who's very used to looking at pure market-driven, profit-driven business angels, how do you convert them to the social enterprise cause?
Great question, and I think I can answer from first-hand experience, seeing how it works in practice. The first thing I wanted to say is it takes a long time. It's because it requires in a way, a change in investor mindset. I think the key here is to provide exposure, to provide opportunities for angel investors or for any potential social investor especially coming from the commercial side, to meet with social enterprises, to get to know their business model, their priorities, and to understand what are some of the trade-offs that social enterprises are making and how they contribute to a social impact that hopefully the investor in question is also keen to promote, and that there's a platform that they can share. I think it's really important that social investors, if they are to be called genuine social investors, that they are in it for the social impact. So it's not a residual kind of result for them. They make investments, and by the way, if there's some social impact, great. So I think that's probably number one on my priority list, and that kind of joint understanding, reaching that kind of joint understanding, because all the technical bits, you know, reading business plans, etc., I think they are the easier parts. Training as such, I think this is more about getting to know each other and providing that exposure and the opportunity for dialogue. So this is where I see intermediaries playing a critical role.
Great, thanks. And let me ask the question from the other angle, from the demand side. If you are meeting a charitable NGO which is used to either getting grants from government or to fundraising from the public, and you're talking to their board and they're saying, well, you know, we're not into finance, we don't want debt. How do you start talking with them, and how long would it take you to convince them?
I don't think you can convince them. I think, again, they need to realize, they need to come to that conclusion themselves. And I would say that the starting point is, what is the vision and what are the aspirations, or what are the goals of the organizations? Where do they want to get to? And are they able to map out what it takes for them to get there? So in other words, looking at medium to long-term plans, and then looking at what are the resource requirements and how those resource requirements can be met given the developments of the financing landscape, specifically talking about financing. I heard a very interesting example to support this. The other day I was talking to Nest about their recent portfolio event, which brought together 17 social enterprises in the Central European region, and they had also invited a number of different investors, private sector, public sector, angels, very new social investment funds. And Nest was telling me that they saw a really, really interesting change on the social enterprise side, in the social enterprise teams, because they kind of woke up to the fact that there's all this finance out there, there's all this opportunity out there, which can be used and could be a really good match for their very ambitious plans and goals, whereas grant finance is no longer available. So their thinking is now much bolder, much more ambitious, and the question they're asking themselves isn't where do we find more grants, but how do we make sure that we develop our business model so that we can tap into this untapped new resource that is social finance.
Great, thanks for a full answer to an improvised question on my part, but one that does kind of fascinate me. Okay, there is a question here from John Blackmore. Hello, John. You're in West London. I know I'm feeling like this is a radio phone-in, but you are planning to set up a fee-generating social enterprise to help companies, I assume for-profit companies, recruit local staff, and including staff from diverse communities in West London to increase social mobility. John would like to know, and we probably can't answer this straight away, but John would like to know from others attending the webinar whether you are aware of other similar initiatives on recruiting social enterprises being a kind of social recruitment agency for companies. So we will try to find that out, John, but it will probably be that you get the answer a little bit after the webinar. John suggests, as a suggestion for Eva's manual, but maybe I would just ask Eva or Dana, are you aware of any other social enterprises that do this kind of thing that would help John, whether it's in the UK or anywhere else in Europe? Eva?
I've heard of an idea, a similar one, in London, and I think we might be actually yes. Well, so I've seen a business plan for one of these, but I'm not aware of any specific one per se that has done this. And one of the reasons being, I think, a lot of companies, as part of their CSR, are now really focusing on hiring various marginalized constituencies and people with various disadvantages. So they somehow go, I guess, directly to target groups locally or Yeah, mostly locally, I think. I'm not aware of any social recruiting agency, as you put it.
Okay, what about you, Dana? Do you have any specific response to John's question about social enterprises as recruiters, or do you have any other more kind of general comments or things you'd like to bring up at this stage, having listened to Eva?
Referring to John's question, I find this very interesting. I don't think I have ever heard of such an idea, so I would be interested to know exactly how it works and what is also motivating enterprises to go to such social recruitment agencies, if it is CSR policies, or if they are really interested in getting professional recruitment because they do not have the skills to do so. So if John could share with us after the webinar some links, I think that would be interesting. But yes, no other comment from me.
All right, fine. Thank you both for that. John, I would maybe just show the one of our European projects, Seed Plus, is an opportunity for social entrepreneurs like yourself to find similar organizations in the rest of Europe. So basically you can apply for this EU funded program and spend between 1 and 6 months with European financial support in another European country, or you can also receive a young social entrepreneur. So there might be out there somewhere in this database, which covers thousands of people, someone who has a similar initiative to yours, and we'll certainly look into that. So just for everyone else as well, that many people have heard of the Erasmus Student Exchange program. Well, this is the Erasmus Entrepreneurs Exchange program, and it is for people of all ages. The young in the title is being a new entrepreneur, a fresh entrepreneur on the scene, rather than being young in years. Okay, let me have a little look back at the questions panel, and I think there might be a helpful comment from Austria. There we go. So Felix Wohlgemuth is helping John, because he has examples of Austrian social enterprises who place their beneficiaries as temporary workers in companies, and quite often, he says, after the temporary work they do actually get hired by the company. So after this we will put you in touch with each other, and that's a nice little connection between John and Felix. Thanks for helping us with that. Okay, there is probably a time for one more question. You need to put your questions into the question panel on the question part of the control panel. The first time you see this, it's a bit confusing what everything is, but you need to look at the questions panel if you want to ask something. This is a good question, Eva. Alejandro Peña is asking, could you please share the 3 main forums that intermediaries or non-financial support providers should be a part of to keep updated and well connected? Now, my obvious answer to that is that you need to be, one of them is certainly Euclid Network. But Eva, who are the others, Eva?
Well, I think the European Venture Philanthropy Association might be mentioned as another one specifically. looking at financing for social enterprises. It has a venture philanthropy route, obviously, but I think it's become a very broad church in a sense that it's now including social enterprises, support organizations, intermediaries, investors, funders, commercial providers as well. So I think that's a good platform and a good source of new knowledge, research, and information, in addition to Euclid, a social enterprise support network, or network of social enterprise support organizations. So I think that's an interesting one to follow. I also think that there are some interesting regional or local examples. So I don't know if Alejandro meant at European level only, but I think that depending on where you are in Europe, it's always really good to be part of the existing in-country or regional platforms and networks. And there are quite a number of those depending on kind of the specialization of the intermediary or of the investor. There would be a number of these depending on whether you are focusing on cooperative types of social enterprises, whether you are more of a crowdfunding type organization, or whether you want to provide capacity building, and is that capacity building to startups or more advanced ones? Now, I don't know if at this point does it make sense to single out any networks or any platforms. Is that helpful, or is that going to be labeled as favoritism?
Yes, it might be. I think that my answer is that the impartial answer is that it depends exactly what your objective is. So you need to look at the regional, national, local level. EVPA and Euclid Network are both networks in a way of intermediaries. EVPA with more of an emphasis on the supply side of social finance, and Euclid more on the demand side. There are others, so you just need to see, well, exactly what do we want to get out of this, if it's in terms of European networking. But quite often there are also informal, local and regional networks and meetups, and it's just about getting talking to the right kind of people. I think it's also about learning from peers. So, who else, if you aspire to be like somebody, like another organization in your country or in the rest of Europe, well, which kind of organizations are they part of, and how did they actually build it up? And you can try to learn from them. That's something that we would try to offer as well. Okay, there are quite a few specific requests for following up on those who asked questions. So we will try to do that, but it probably does not make sense to do that for the entire group. So let me draw this webinar to a close, and yes, just show you what we are going to be doing next as Euclid Network. So we have our event coming up in The Hague on the 11th and 12th of April. You can see the message there that everyone's responsible, which is also in the social finance recipe book, and it is for all sorts of different actors in the system. So we want to have social enterprises there, we'd like to have public authorities there, social investors and universities. And the social finance recipe book is one of our key inspirations, as is the forthcoming tool next year from the OECD and the Commission on assessing the ecosystem, which is more policy orientated. So we'd like to see at least some of you there. It's a great place for, in the coffee break, happening to find the right kind of person who is a few steps further down the road than you are, and you can learn from them as a peer. That's what we're all about in Euclid Network, is learning from each other, learning from peers. So thanks for being a part of that today. And we did just finally share the results of the poll on your awareness of EU policy and funding. So there's obviously quite a bit more work to do there. Thank you all for taking part and paying attention, and thank you especially to Eva Varga and to Dana Verbal from the Commission for being part of this and sharing your knowledge. And we will see you next year, we hope, in The Hague, if you can possibly join us. And very happy Christmas to everyone. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay.